Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A video number 57. Make sure you keep asking questions. Doesn't matter they're about. They can be about anything. Just know I don't respond to review requests or Let's Play requests in these videos, but I will respond to them in the comments. Once again, a review request is, what do you think about insert game here? That's not a question for a Q&A. If you want to ask about some very specific feature about it, or some bit about it in the news or something like that, feel free to ask about that, but don't ask me about what my thoughts on insert game here in general are, because that's a review request. Anyway, gameplay in the background is of Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, because I'm working on it right now, and if you're wondering how that's going, it's not so bad so far. It's not particularly amazing either, but so far at least it's not bad, but we'll have to wait and see on how it goes for the rest of the game, because, well, they don't exactly have the best history with this particular series, so let's go ahead and get started with the Q&A itself with a question from Rip Out Your Prejudice. Are you the kind of gamer that's willing to look over technical issues if the game is fun and enjoyable enough? You guys should know by now that, yes, I am. Plenty of games out there are just buggy as hell, and I still enjoy the living crap out of them. Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, Fallout New Vegas, Alpha Protocol. Yeah, Alpha Protocol had way more problems than just technical issues, but I still managed to enjoy that thing. Arcanum, pretty much anything that Troika did, anything that Obsidian does, basically. If the game is good, then it will overcome its technical problems. Now, if the game is unplayable, then that's a serious problem. For example, Arkham Knight. I have no idea if that game is any good or not, but what I do know is it's basically unplayable as I'm recording this video. So, I can't really comment too much on Arkham Knight, but as it stands, I can't play the damn thing, so I can't say whether it's good or not. But if it's unplayable, then I can't like it. And if the game is just bad or just mediocre or even average and still has tons of technical problems, well, there's not really much to get out of it. And that's the unfortunate truth. It's why games like, say, Skyrim are made even worse due to their technical problems. It's a bad game in and of itself, but the sheer amount of problems I had running that damn thing made it even worse. So, technical issues are kind of a deciding factor on whether or not I can recommend something at any given point. But at the same time, they don't really necessarily dictate how much fun I have playing a certain game, or how much I get out of that game. If the game is good, it stands on its own merits, and that's enough for me. Next question is from Evil Shark 22. What are your views on education? Do you believe that college is necessary to succeed in modern-day America, or do you feel that its need is over-exaggerated? Well, we've basically gotten to the point where college is the new high school, in that the minimum requirements for a lot of jobs is basically a bachelor's degree at minimum, which is really, really bizarre when you think about what you're doing in these various jobs. Some of them, you don't really need anything more than a high school education to get to, but they still throw that in there to basically narrow the applicant field. There are a lot of people applying to a fairly few number of jobs. That's really the ultimate problem here. The job market has become so competitive that a college degree doesn't really set you apart anymore. So you need other things to compensate for it. And so what ends up happening is the bachelor's degree becomes the minimum requirement, and then what they really want from you is numerous years of experience, which is hilarious when you look at things that are entry-level positions that require 3 years of experience at minimum. It's like, really? Really, guys? This is an entry-level position and you want this much experience? That doesn't even make sense. Whereas before, you could pretty much get a job right out of high school, and that wasn't really that big of a problem, whether it would be a factory job or working in a chemical plant or any number of things like that. But they tended to ship a lot of those jobs overseas because it was just ultimately cheaper to ship it over to China. And so now we're kind of stuck with, well, we got all these white-collar jobs, which basically need a college degree, even if they don't really need one. For example, programming. I know that plenty of employers would rather have people who are very experienced coders than people who have just gone through a computer science program, because they prioritize different things. Computer science prioritizes the whole theoretical aspect of it, whereas when you're hiring someone to do programming, they need to actually know how to do it, not just sit there and theorize about it. Now, when you're talking about development, that's when the computer science guys come in, but ultimately, it's just this kind of weird messed up system we've got right now, where the trades have become less and less in vogue, so to speak, where they used to be seen as very viable jobs that would earn you quite a bit of money and they would earn you a very respectable living. But now, instead of wanting just a respectable living, a lot of people just want to go and somehow manage to make millions of dollars. And that's not really all that practical. And if you think about it, someone like an electrician or a plumber or something like that, they make good money. They make very good money, in fact. And we're getting fewer and fewer of them because people just aren't trying to go into those fields, and the trade schools just aren't really all that popular or even exist anymore. There are plenty of spots where they used to have trade schools and they just got rid of the program entirely. So now how do you learn to be a plumber or an electrician or whatever? Well, you basically had to become an apprentice. And not many people are going to really think about that. So it's kind of a bizarre, not really sustainable position we've gotten ourselves in. And part of the blame lies on society itself for making college this kind of you must do it thing, where if you think about it, these days college is not necessarily a literal requirement for every job out there. It is for a lot of them, but for every job out there, it's not a literal requirement. But it's still a thing that you're basically expected to do anyway. It's basically a social norm at this point. And I don't really know how we managed to get to that point, but frankly, it's pretty annoying, and not everyone is suited to college. Some people do terribly in college, even if they're very intelligent and capable people. It's just the way that the education system is. But ultimately, I think everyone just needs to do the research in order to understand exactly what they're getting themselves into. Because if you're wanting to go into a field that basically requires a college degree, you need to know that you're going to go to college and what to expect from that. And if you really just want to get a job and earn some money and not necessarily go into one of those fields that really does require a college degree, well, look into your options. I've known plenty of people who didn't go to college and still make very good money. So it's a combination of luck, who you know, and, well, how capable you are of stuff. If you have any skills, that especially helps. Anyway, let's move on to a question from Fat Freddy. Which games had a great atmosphere according to you, and why? Well, some games have really fantastic atmospheres and nothing else. For example, the entire Stalker series. Why? Well, when you step into the world of the Stalker games, you find that the zone is just this incredibly desolate, depressing place, but yet is still completely full of life. These worlds just feel alive. They feel like they have their own ecosystem, and they do, in fact, have their own ecosystem. And that just goes so far in just lending this game some atmosphere. It's just too bad that the rest of the game sucks. In other games, it's a combination of various factors. For example, in The Witcher 3, when you get to Skellige, for example, it has absolutely fantastic atmosphere because of a combination of the absolutely fantastic soundtrack with this world that is not only just absolutely gorgeous, but there's tons of stuff in it. It feels alive. And really, that's the major thing. It has to feel like the world is coming alive in front of you. Whether it be just wildly fantastical or hyper-realistic, whatever it might well be. It may even be a game that has extremely rudimentary graphics, but just the way it is presented ultimately determines how atmospheric it is. And atmosphere is just kind of this something that is nebulous. It's hard to describe. And some games get it right, other games get it wrong. Dark Souls, for example, has surprisingly good atmosphere from how minimalistic it is. It feels like you're in this oppressive, dark world that you're just completely alone in, really. There are a few people you interact with, but you still feel like you're alone the entire time, and it just kind of creates this depressing atmosphere. But ultimately, atmosphere is particularly hard to discuss because it's one of those you know it when you see it things. It's not necessarily something you can write a formula for and really just go for it. And that's something that is problematic with just about anything that builds heavily on feeling rather than any sort of empirical criteria. And that's why so few games actually have really good atmosphere. And the ones we usually talk about that have really good atmosphere are the ones that do it in this kind of creepy or depressing vibe, because you don't really get that vibe from most games, and so that really sets them apart from things and makes them memorable. And it's also why I can't really name all that many games that are truly atmospheric, because I haven't really encountered all that many that feel truly atmospheric. A few here and there, or a few that are in certain parts, but generally I don't play a lot of games that would be considered atmospheric, or the atmosphere just falls flat on its face in front of me. It just depends. Let's move on to a question from Ponimayu, I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm sorry. Where are you from? Curious from a linguistic perspective, because some of your idioms and other phrases are a bit odd to my ears. In particular, you say and such like that instead of and stuff like that. I say whatever I please, actually. I'm actually a wild assortment of various dialects and idioms. It goes all over the place. Some of the things I say are very northern, some of them are very southern, some of them are very midwestern. I'm actually from the Midwest, but with the amount of traveling I've done, I've just picked up all sorts of weird idioms here and there. And even worse is when all the various languages I know, or the various bits of language I know, start filtering into my everyday speech. It is not at all uncommon for people to ask me questions, and I will respond to them in German or Japanese. And in some cases it gets even worse than that. My native language is of course English, but certain words or phrases have just completely supplanted the English in my brain. For example, I actually have to think about it in order to say around the corner. Because I got so used to saying things like gleich die Ecke or just die Ecke to say around the corner that it actually becomes kind of problematic when I'm trying to say certain things. And even simple things like the filler words that you say when you are thinking about something, like or in my particular case, a lot of the time I go no. And so it ultimately stands to reason that my idioms are going to sound weird when things like that happen. Anyway, let's move on to the last question of this Q&A, which is from Baba Snooker. What's your opinion on spongy enemies, in FPS games especially, and why do devs think this is a good measure of challenge in their games? They don't think it's a good measure of challenge in their games, it's just they don't really know much better. The way you make an enemy in an FPS or a third-person shooter or any number of action games difficult is to give them really good AI. You make them use cover very effectively, you make them flush you out with things like grenades, you make them work as a team. That is hard to do. AI programming is really, really hard to do. So what most developers do instead is they just make enemies do a lot of damage, or they give them a lot of health. I personally find bullet spongy enemies to be incredibly annoying. Because, again, it's not hard to beat them, it's just a matter of, well, doing enough damage to bring them down. It feels like a false challenge. Now, if you're doing that in a game that's not really centered around twitch action or anything like that, for example, if you're doing it in an action-adventure game, then it's less of a problem, because at least in that particular context, there's different things you can do. For example, you might attack them in a different way, they might have a weak spot you can target, all sorts of things like that. But generally, they don't try to do something like that in FPS, and it just ends up devolving into, well, how we make this enemy difficult. I know, give him a lot of health, or give him armor that makes him invulnerable to bullets or something like that. Hell, that's one of the biggest problems I have with the BioShock series. They never really understood anything beyond, well, we gotta make the enemies bullet spongy, because that's the way you make difficult enemies, I guess. Because our AI certainly isn't that good. Luckily, other parts of those games can bring them up, but some FPSs don't really escape the bullet sponge. And even worse, it's been spilling over into other genres for quite a long time, where things like, say, Skyrim are not at all difficult, other than the fact that the enemies become, well, not bullet sponges, but sword sponges if you up the difficulty, and that's really it. They do more damage and they up their health. They don't really do anything else. So I guess you can probably expect that when you get to Fallout 4, where enemies are just going to be bullet sponges in that too. Because I highly doubt that Bethesda knows how to program anything better than extremely basic AI, considering they've never done it before. Anyway, the long and short of it is that I hate bullet spongy enemies. It's just that usually other parts of the game are able to compensate for it. And if it's not able to compensate, well, then the game's not any fun. Anyway, that was Q&A 57. Make sure to keep asking questions. I will catch you guys in later videos.